Hi and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games.
My name is Alexandre.
And my name is Grant.
His name is Fred.
Yeah, my name is Fred. The idea for this video was to do something that we've been discussing for quite a while.
Quite a while.
I've always wanted to revisit my first design, Red Flag over Paris, and I thought it would be interesting to actually do some sort of review of it. I've been thinking about it for quite some time for different reasons. First of all, for myself, I like the idea of autocriticism.
Yeah, it's a very Marxist thing to do.
Yes, looking at my work and figuring out where I think it fails, where I think it succeeds, and approach it in a critical way, also to help me inform future work, but also because over the years, I've realized that a lot of designers are very sensitive about their games being criticized. And I thought
let's not delve into that.
and I was thinking, well, that would be interesting to actually have a designer looking at his own work and showing that you can be critical of your own work, and that's actually maybe a positive thing.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of good things to say about Red Flag over Paris,
but there's also
some bad things to say about it. So,
and that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how it is.
Red Flag over Paris was released in late 2021, just in time for the 150th anniversary. I would have preferred, first of all, that it would have been released earlier, but that's mostly my fault. I wasn't ready for it. I wanted it to be ready for April 2021. I failed, but that's pretty much it. But it was released in 2021.
There was also like a pandemic at that moment.
Yeah, there was a bit of a pandemic.
I don't know.
It made things a bit more complicated, but we managed to hit the 150th anniversary. So that's the first thing. So it covers the Paris Commune, so the whole period. You had the rising tension between the government in Versailles and the new socialist government in Paris that was called the Commune. And each player are playing both factions. So if you don't know much about the game, this is like the basic gist of it. And it is, I would say, an entry-level kind of CDG.
That we might need to talk about
it. But it is a card-driven game. So the lineage is directly from games like Twilight Struggle. It is
and specifically Fort Sumter, which we
and specifically
right
Fort Sumter,
I mean,
and even
credit to Mark Herman where credit is due.
And even more specifically, if we're talking about credit, 13 Days, which was a major influence.
Which is right there.
Which is behind the camera, which was like both those games were a massive influence. If I must say, I have a preference for 13 Days over Fort Sumter, for different reasons, one of them being the theme, but I also think that 13 Days does a lot of interesting things with the spaces themselves.
I do think the theme to Fort Sumter is really interesting, though. It's a really good theme.
It is, it is. And the thing that I find brilliant with Fort Sumter and why it was so important in my design is that it showed the escalation of tension before the Civil War. And I thought it was really interesting to have a war-themed game that was not focusing on the war, but what led to the war. And I thought it was super interesting.
Like the moments before a war and the moments right after a war are, I think, like two of the most interesting topics that have been like undergamed in a way to me. It's
totally agreed.
So, and it's interesting because Red Flag over Paris sort of like bridges the gap because there's a bit of a like military escalation and a bit of a political side to it, which I think is really like, if we're going to go ahead and say something positive first, I think that it's really interesting to have like this balance between the two, sort of like the two levels. I mean, I think it works well. I also enjoy the fact that like there are like different subset of rules for every, and that like there's a geographical element to the military aspect. And then what I think is one of the aspects of the game that I find the most interesting is how like different ideas are like linked. And there's like, to represent visually political ideas and political movements is a very interesting thing. To me, it's like one of the things that I think is most interesting about the design. And we've been playing 1989 recently, and there's a bit of that in that design too. And it's something that I find really interesting.
So going back to the lineage, and that's, I think, the departure is that you have on one hand games like 1989 that you're mentioning, or Twilight Struggle, and then you've got games like 13 Days and Fort Sumter, where, and that's the thing, I thought that there were two extremes. I thought that those games might be a bit too abstract, and the other games might be a bit too involved and hard to get to the table for new players. So I was trying to find something that was a small step up from those days, those games, and also that portrayed an event that was more than under game. It has never been gamed. So that was the idea.
Ungamed.
But ungamed. And I'm really happy that you make the comparison with 1989 because definitely it was one of the influence. And I actually wanted to show the political side of things as a ideas network.
That's exactly the word that I was looking for, is ideas network.
So there was a lot of those ideas that influenced, and maybe we can talk about the objective of the design, because I think this is where you think that there is the first failure of the game. I wanted this game to be an introductory CDG to get people into those kind of hybrid between political and war games, and also people who might be interested in heavier Euro games, and show them, like there are some links. You have wooden cubes, you have an action economy, you're trying to move cubes around to be able to place them on the board, so there is a bit of it's not Terra Mystica, but I mean you need to have cubes coming in.
I played this game with friends with whom I mostly play Euros and like Ameritrash games, and they've enjoyed it. The visual presentation is appealing, where credit is due.
So that's Donald Hegarty.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think it tells a compelling story. Yeah. So that makes it a little more, a little more attractive, I think. But I also think that like it's never going to be the first CDG that I show. So I will have a much easier time showing someone a game like Votes for Women. I think that Votes for Women is a much better intro CDG than this one is. I even think that I saw it like Fire and Stone. I think is a very good intro CDG, because I think that it's easier to explain what you're trying to do. Whereas in this one, I think in some ways it's fascinating, but it's also a little cerebral. Like there are some cerebral aspects to it that make it a little hard to explain. And then there's all these little subset of rules. And now I'm like, Fred, all of these things that work wrong, but I really enjoy the game. That's what I want to make clear.
Just to build upon what you said, the thing is that I think when this game was released, there were not that many options for intro level CDGs that were also a bit ambitious in the story that it was telling. The thing is that like really not that long after, a lot of good games were released. And honestly, if you ask me what would be a good way to introduce someone to a card-driven game, for me there is no question. I will show them Votes for Women. Yeah. It is the most streamlined system. It is very easy to get into, but you still have a wealth of decision. Yeah. Maybe the advantage that this one has over Votes for Women is that it's shorter.
Yes.
But it is like I think Votes for Women is so easy to teach, and I think it's probably one of the best.
And the fact that it's longer makes it so that like people will have by the end of the game they've managed to get a hold of it. Yeah. Whereas in this one that's the other negative aspect of the game, is that yes, it's short, and I really enjoy how tight it is. Like it's a cruel game. It's so tight and violent, and like every move counts, but it
has a lot of sharp edges.
It can break you especially if you're playing against someone who has experience with the game and doesn't hold back. It's going to be like a crushing defeat. There's no two ways about it, and you won't even have the time to like get a hold of the system. You're going to be broken. So in a way, it's like it's designed as an intro level CDG, but I think it's sort of like an expert level CDG, in that it's so tight that it doesn't like hold back.
Yeah, it's not forgiving, and I think that's one of the major failings that I had as a designer, is that when I made this, I was so focused on small footprint. Like it needs to be short to play, not too hard to learn the rules, and don't take too much space on the table. Like that was basically the idea, and I was like, that's going to be the way for me to talk about the Paris Commune. But in the end, I came up with something that has so many sharp edges that, if I must be honest, if I look at this, I don't see an intro level CDG. I see a light CDG for experienced players.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like I would never recommend this for someone who's never. If you have a specific interest in the Paris Commune, definitely go for it, because those sharp edges won't matter, because you're going to be so excited about the theme that you're going to go. And that's what I say for anyone who wants to get into historical games. The best motivation is going to be your interest in the theme, and you can overcome so many things. And if you have an interest in the Paris Commune, that's actually a great way to get into historical gaming because it's not that hard.
Yeah,
but it is a mean game.
Yeah, it is. But the topic is interesting. Like, I think that like in wargaming circles, there's a lot of talk about like discovering themes through history, and I think it's especially fascinating that like Red Flag Over Paris was produced by GMT Games, which is based in the US, and that's not like a part of history that Americans know a lot about. And I think that right there, and also there's a lot of like military history and let's call it like right-leaning teams that dominate the space. So to see a story that is like a leftist story is inspiring and interesting, and I think that it shifts the sort of focus. Like, and I think that you also did that with Just of Robin Hood, and I think that this, as a gamer, I really appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons why, like, as soon as I saw that the game existed, I picked it up. You know,
and I think it's one of the few things that I'm really proud of when I'm thinking about this game, is that I could bring such a theme. I think I did a pretty good job in the historical notes.
It's generous,
and I gave a lot of material for people to explore. And if I'm thinking about the kind of topic that I brought up, like, I'm very proud that I made this game. When I'm thinking about, okay, what games have you made? I haven't made a Belge game. I haven't made a Waterloo game. I made a game, like my first game was a game on a topic that was never covered. That was one of the pivotal moments for social movement history. And I think that having this released by GMT, to have the GMT treatment and have a wider audience, is for me a great success. And the fact that the game got out of stock really fast was also very satisfying. Like, it was not necessarily particularly beloved system, a topic that nobody knew about, and for me that was a success. And I feel like the implementation of the theme in the game is also one of the things that I'm kind of proud of. I think that within the constraint that I gave myself, what you get is actually pretty decent. It could have been better, and I think we had some discussions, and that's something interesting where you mentioned, a game on the Commune would have been so interesting if you were actually playing all players as Communards of different factions fighting against Versailles and have this political tensions. And I think that there is a game there. But at this stage, I was ready for doing this. I think if I were to do another game on the Commune, I would be more creative with the way I approached it. But I think I'm still proud that was my first game that was on that topic, and that I did such a serious job at portraying the event in a fair and interesting manner.
Absolutely. But one thing I'll say about, like, and it's a challenge that I find interesting about this game specifically, and it's so short. Sometimes you end up not concentrating on the events as much as the points, and a lot of the history passes through like the event cards, and I feel like that's one of the things about like shorter games is like you don't have as much time to sort of like lean into the history, which I find a little, because you want a short, tight game, and that's a challenge that I don't have any easy answers as to how you make a game where you get like deep into the subject, but it's still short. Like, I feel like that was one of my first impressions of the game, was like, because I think it's interesting because the game is about an event that is sort of a flashpoint thing, you know. So
that's also why I wanted the game to feel so tight, because the event was really tight for the people in it. Like, it was really fast. Things moved really fast and collapsed really fast.
And you get that feel.
And you get that feel.
Absolutely.
But then on the other end, I feel like it was also a failure on my part to keep it so tight, and I think it's too tight. Like, in the sense that it also makes for quite a frustrating experience if you don't have the right cards. It is possible to have a game where you never have the right cards at the right time, and it's really hard to catch up. So it can be a bit frustrating in that part. Also, as you said, it doesn't leave a lot of room for the game to breathe and for you to get into the history. In the end, you end up playing it very mechanically, which is like a complete failure on compared to what I wanted to do. And it's more prone to luck. It doesn't let people get into the theme, and it makes for a game that can be frustrating.
But that's a lot of CDGs. I mean, it's also, you need as a player to sit down afterwards and sort of read the historical material and sort of like get into like, oh, what is this card and what event does it refer to?
Yeah.
And how is each event represented on the board? And that's one thing that I was curious, like as we were playing, I played the game a lot on Rally the Troops.
Yeah.
And I think it does tend to make it even more mechanical, and as we were playing it physically, I was like more cautious of like, oh, this event does that on the board, and you see it a little. And I'm curious as to like, are there like specific events that you're especially pleased with? Like, oh, this one I think it does, like what it does on the board really tells the story. Like, is there cards where you feel like it's not just like remove this and that, and it really lets the story unfold? So
I think there are, and that's one of the things, like some people say that the events are very abstract, which I mean, within the construct of the game, this is fair. And quite a few of those events are pretty generic. I'm going to be honest. Like, it's like move a cube, do that, kind of boring stuff. And
boring. No.
Not boring. but the thing is that
play oriented. Let's call it play oriented.
Very play oriented. But I think there are some stuff that I would say are pretty well designed, like especially if you know the history, and some of them are pretty straightforward. Like Sapper Tactics, super straightforward. So that was part of the. I don't know if it will zoom in. Doesn't matter. But I will show probably an image.
That's one of the bonus cards, right?
So that's one of the bonus cards that were released in C3I for the censorship variant. But Sapper Tactics is like pretty straightforward. So the thing with Sapper Tactics, it was the way the Versailles army approached fighting in the street, and how it was actually the end of the barricade, 1871, because they actually came up with an approach to counteract the effect of the barricade and remove its ability to block a street. And this is pretty much that. Like, you just remove one barricade where you're present, a thing that is normally super hard to do, you do it with just one card. And it does show what actually happened. Les Cantinières is my
that's my favorite card.
My favorite card of the game, just amazing. And it's actually, I think, a really good description of what actually happened with the how women came into the conflict and how they took active part in combat for the first time. And I think this. So there are a few of those cards where I'm like, you know what? If you look at the game and you've read the historical material and you see the event, you're like, I think some of them I'm pretty proud of. I just think that there is some of them who are too convoluted, and on the other hand, there is some of them that are too generic. And I would have liked to have a deck where all of the cards are like Les Cantinières or Sapper Tactics, like efficient but clever abstraction of what they were.
And that's like, I'm thinking, how would that happen? And I think it's the thing where, like, you did a lot of research, obviously, you know a lot about that topic, and then it's a topic that a lot of people don't know a lot about. So there's this difficulty between, like, I'm introducing you to this very specific and kind of niche topic, but then at the same time I know so much about it that there's like this network of ideas that I'm trying to represent and put into the game. And I feel like that's one of the more complex things about like CDGs is like the cards do a lot of the heavy lifting in the design about like the thematic integration.
I think that's very true, and I mean, I was a very inexperienced designer then. It was my first game. I was also not very confident in my ability to make the game in the first place, so I was a bit worried. And I think maybe in a way I didn't take enough risks, and I also didn't realize when I was doing it some of the flaws of this design. And I think the deck is a good example of that. There is a lot of really good ideas. There is a bit of like basic generic fluff, and then there are some things that are just too convoluted. And I think overall, when I'm looking at the design, I keep seeing when I play it convoluted aspects to it, and I'm like, we were talking about the tightness and everything. You have a game that is very tight, very mean. It's supposed to be smooth, but there is a lot of things that go in the way of the rhythm. I think calculating initiative.
Yeah, for sure.
Super annoying. Like, so stupid the way I made it. Like, it is.
I wouldn't say stupid, but I convoluted for sure.
Yeah, it's convoluted, and you're like, and I'm like, oh,
that's the self-criticism kicking in. There's gonna be like,
who let me do that? And I was like, this is such a stupid idea. Like, it is so annoying to do at the beginning of each turn. I could have if I stopped and think and discuss with other people, come up with something way more elegant, super annoying. The other thing that I'm frustrated about are even the rules for ups. Like you need to remove before you place.
And
they make a lot of sense. Like they give you a lot of tactical depth, but when you are playing it, it is so annoying to remind people of it, and it gives them limitations. It is frustrating, and I'm like, oh my god, this is. And the fact that you play a card, you can only play political or only military.
Yeah, which makes sense. That I really enjoy. But what you were saying about like the different stages, and that's one of the funny things is I feel like this is a game. Sadly, that when you just add that little bit of automation that Rally the Troops gives it all seems a lot more seamless than it is on the table.
Yes.
And I feel like this game, like I prefer to play it in person.
Yeah.
But technically, it plays better when some of the things are being taken in charge because some of the things are obviously counterintuitive.
Yeah. And the other one is the rules for removing a cube in a military space.
Yeah, I wasn't even gonna go there. That's you calculate crazy.
You calculate the strength, and you draw a card and everything, and I'm like, oh my god. And I know what I wanted to do, and it does what I wanted to do, but it is so clunky. And
clunky is a good word.
But I need it. And so that's the thing. The thing is that originally when the game was released, I hated those things. Like they drove me mad. Like I was playing it, I was like, and then
he's going down that spiral of self-detestation on camera. It's beautiful.
And then at some point, I actually kind of accepted them for what they were, and in a way, their clunkiness also. For me now are part of its charm, but it makes it for a very flawed game in that regard, at least mechanically, and that's the thing. Now, I'm not so irritated by it anymore, but
But with all that being said, I think it does do a lot of things right, and I think that like it does a lot in. I mean, what did we play it in like? 30 minutes. Like if you're experienced, you're going through the game, and it's cool to have like that pacing. Like we've been saying negative things about the rhythm of the game because it sort of has this stop-start quality to it, but overall it's quite impressive.
But that's the thing. What I think the game does is that it shows that those smaller formats of CDGs can portray things in an interesting way, and that we shouldn't discard them. And I think that's a really cool thing. So that's why I'm happy that it actually sparked Bells of Treason. There is someone that actually sent me a prototype for something about the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, awesome.
And heavily inspired by Red Flag Over Paris, but discussing with them, we actually managed to find, like, based on my experience of what I was frustrated by this, I could give them some feedbacks for them to avoid some of the pitfalls. And I think they implemented a lot of things that retrospectively I would have liked to have in this game. Like how the pivotal spaces could have been more interesting. Like there is a lot of cool stuff that can be done. And I think that's also one of the things that I'm proud of, is that when you look at the agency system, the momentums.
The momentum is really cool, and the fact that the asymmetry, we haven't mentioned the asymmetry.
And
but
the asymmetry between the faction.
The way that you lose cubes as the commune, and if you don't get some of that momentum early on, you're going to just, you won't have any pieces left to play the game with. I find very cool. And you mentioned the adjacency, and I also mentioned it earlier. I think it's really interesting, and I think that's one of the major differences between this game and Fort Sumter, is it?
Yeah, and the others, and that's why I think was interesting. Like, it showed that you could actually add some very specific dynamics that will portray a specific conflict in an interesting way without having too many rules. And when I'm seeing what's being done on Bells of Treason, when I saw the prototype on the Spanish Civil War, I'm like, well, I'm happy that I did this. And Joe has also made one on Kronstadt, and like I'm really happy that this game actually inspired people to do small CDG that you can play in 30-45 minutes on topics that are not necessarily game. Like, I'm so excited that a game on Kronstadt could be released with a system like this. Like, it's really, really cool. So So that's the thing. So in a way, I'm happy for that. I think the asymmetry is something that I did well. I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
But I think there is one thing that we need to talk about. Because honestly, if I look, and I'm going to be very honest, the game out of the box...
There is dust.
Yeah, there is dust on it. Yeah, I haven't
he
played
doesn't
it
play it.
Yeah. The game out of the box, as it was released, I'm going to be very fair. I think I would have given it a 6 out of 10.
Oh, you're harsh. But
maybe a bit harsh, but I think like if it...
Because I played it quite a bit as like without that censorship.
But that's the thing. Like, and that's why I want to evaluate it twice. Once out of the box, once with the censorship variant. I would maybe a 6.5 because like coming up with a game on the Paris Commune is... If I hadn't designed it, I think I would have been super excited for it because of the theme. I think I would have found the game interesting, but I might have been frustrated. So I don't know, 6.5, something like this.
Are you waiting for...
Yeah, out of the box.
Oh, out of the box. Honestly, as I was playing it back then, I was like, to me, it was like an 8.
Yeah.
To me, it was an 8.
But retrospectively, today.
But I mean, I do agree that the censorship variant adds a lot to it. So I mean, I can be a little mean. I can give it like 7.5. I can take it down a notch.
7. Let's do 7.
No.
Because that's for me one of
you're getting me to tank your game. No, it's crap. It's
but I think it's really important to discuss because the thing is that I had a lot of ideas. One of the frustrations that I had that I didn't solve, by the way, is that I like in our games the illusion, like creating the illusion of movement.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the failures also on the military side is that you just place cubes. And that's one
because
of the
there's not that many spaces. I think it's hard. Like movement, that's why, like, for example, like the best movement games are, in a way, are still X and Counter war games, as you see this sort of like, it's almost like a stop motion animation.
Exactly.
Which you don't get when you have like
6 spaces.
Yeah, 6 spaces.
But in a way, and this is why I'm excited about Joe Dewhurst Kronstadt, is that he actually managed to come up with something that when I saw it, I was like, yeah, I should have done this. Like where you actually move the cubes around the board, which is it. That's, I think, one of the things that I'm sad, like something, but anyway. But anyway, the game out of the box, 6, 6.5, not
7, 7.5 if you're not the designer and you're not like doing, I mean. That
being said, as soon as it was released, I already had a few ideas that I couldn't have implemented in the game because we wanted to send it to print. There was a lot of things around the supply lines at that time and everything. We didn't want to delay anything. So if we wanted to have it for 2021, we had to stop at some point. And I was frustrated because there were some ideas that I didn't really have time to test, to actually implement in it. And this is where the censorship variant comes in. Like really early on, I didn't give up on that game, even though I was frustrated by it. I thought I need to do the work because I wanted it to be as good as possible. And I decided to share online on BGG a variant that, for me, fixes a lot of the frustration that I have about the game. And so the censorship variant itself is really simple, is that instead of drawing 4 cards at the beginning of each round, you draw 5. Then you decide initiative, and then in initiative order, you're going to discard a card. That makes the whole discard thing more interesting because you can always activate an event, and it makes it so that if you have the initiative, which can be a big disadvantage in a game like this that is so tight because you're not the last one playing a card in a round, it makes having initiative a bit more interesting because you bury a card, which is pretty powerful, and also you get an interesting option on top.
I agree.
And for me, this already less prone to luck because you have 5 cards, you discard 1. So statistically,
that's actually the part that I like. I get what you're saying about like the little intricacies.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get that deep into the game, it's interesting. But right off the bat, the fact that you're discarding a card and you have this little option, it makes it a little less like.
It gives you a bit more breathing room, and it gives you more space to decide. So I think that's one of the interesting. For me, that's the thing, and for me, it shifts the game significantly enough that I would never play the game base game because I think it's too much effort for how prone to luck it is. But on the other side, when you have the censorship variant, for me it's the right balance, just right. Then on top of that, I really want to thank Roger McGowan for proposing to publish it in C3I. The publishing by C3I is that you have those extra cards that in the end, when I'm looking at the full deck, so the original deck and the cards from C3I, I think it tells a rich history of the commune. It's not comprehensive. There is a lot of things that could have still been there, but I'm looking at it. I'm not ashamed. Like
no, and you shouldn't be.
And I'm really happy. Like I'm looking at it, and it's like, well, if I look at this, and if you have a slight interest in the commune, or if you've read a few books on it, you're looking at this as like, this is decent work.
Yeah. And as someone who has read books like before and after playing the game, I will say that having played the game made reading subsequent books like it gave me some
a bit of texture, which is what I wanted,
which is what a good historical game should do, and I think that for all the negative things about Red Flag Over Paris, I still think it's an enjoyable game, and I think it sort of misses its own mark, but it is something else, and what it ends up being is good in and out of itself, even though it has some little quirks, some design quirks. But I think it's really important, like as we mentioned earlier, to do these exercises in self-criticism. I mean, because
for me, that's the only way forward. Like if you're not able to look at what you do critically, you're never going to get better. And this was my first design. I'm not... I don't know how to say, like, I'm not a genius designer. Like, for me, designing requires a lot of work, a lot of failures, a lot of iterations. And if I want to get better at it, what I need to do is actually look at my games and take a hard look at them. For the next one to be better. Or even if I thought about making a second edition, like if I wanted to make it better for a second edition in the future, I need to be honest with it. And I think that's really important. For me, that's the only way forward in a creative endeavor. Like, you need to be able to do this.
For sure. And it's interesting that you mentioned that we could do this exercise about just Robin Hood, and maybe someday we'll do. But some of the like I see how you've tried to iron out some of these things in Just of Robin Hood, but I still see like bits and pieces of I think they're Fred Serval things. You know, it's as if you were always trying to make simple games, but still you always end up putting something that makes it just a wee bit more complicated than an intro, like purely intro design. Like maybe you're just not like an intro wargame designer, and you need to. Embrace. You need to embrace your inner Berg.
That's maybe it, and I think that's a great conclusion for the review. But thanks for watching. See you soon, and maybe next year.
For sure. It's great to do this. Essayer de mettre le cerveau en anglais. Normalement, ça se passe bien, mais il y a quand même tout le temps un petit... There's a little moment where it needs to switch.
Especially as we've been speaking in French.
For also outside. Absolutely, because we are in France.
Exactly.